I think all of us kind of understand the basic story of, the Three Little Pigs, or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and our Beauty and the Beast. And so we know the basic premise of it, but if you, let's say read a novel about it or watch a 3-hour epic movie about it, you learn subtle details and you put things together and you're like, oh, okay, that's why this is. So that's, at the end of the day, I know we kind of have the so what about muscles, but this is more of connecting the dots mechanically on why things are the way they are, and how we can figure out who's doing what and how they're doing it. Okay? So the first thing I'm going to do, you're going to hear me say this a ton of times. It's one of your commandments. Muscles only pull. That's all they can do. All they can do is pull. And your first instinct is like, well, wait, I push all the time. And I'm like, and you're not wrong, but your hand is not a muscle. And your feet is not a muscle. I mean, you have muscles in your hands. But when you push on something, mechanically that push is because of intrinsic things that are pulling. Muscles pull on bone. Bones can push. So again, it's indirect that your bone might be pushing on something outside of you because of muscles that are pulling inside of you. And another thing that's cool is that muscles pulling inside of you pull on bones that can push on things inside of you. That's how your patella works. You have muscles pulling on the top and the bottom of the patella, almost kind of like how an arrow, the string of an arrow right of the bow. I'm sorry, you have the bowstring, and you think of that string as pulling, right? Well, yeah, but the string is actually pushing the arrow to go forward. So indirectly, when we're pulling on this patella, the patella is actually pushing on our knee. But that's not the muscle that's pushing. It's a bone that's pushing because of muscles that are pulling. Muscles can only pull. If you show me a muscle that can push, you are an X-Man. And think about it. If muscles could do both, right? If my bicep could pull and push, why would I need my tricep? Like, in other words, if your muscles could pull and push, you would only need half of the muscles in your body. One of the reasons we have to cover all of our bases in the front, the back, the outside, inside, is because we have to have puppet strings that pull in every direction of motion. A puppeteer who is trying to make the puppet move in all different kind of directions needs a string to pull in every direction of motion the puppeteer wants the puppet to move. The strings don't pull and push. How do ropes work, right? You don't attach a rope to something and push with the rope. What if the rope is frozen? Shut up. You don't have frozen muscles. But even still, the concept of pull force, and when you want to get deep into the rabbit hole, then your everything is a type of pull. Everything is a type of redirection of a pull, is what I really mean. So, muscles can only pull. And although that sounds super simple, the complexity of the options that can happen when things can only pull can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. What I mean by that is, when anything pulls on something else, there's only so many things that can happen. When you attach a rope, let's say you're trying to move a big tree in your yard, and your neighbor or yourself comes and you attach a rope to the back of the truck and to the tree, and you take off. There's only so many things that can happen. The rope can pop, the tree can move, your bumper can fly off. I mean, there's so many options that can happen when you pull on something. And things like that can happen in your body. The rope could snap if you pull too much, or if there's a miscommunication on the muscles. But within normal reason, one of three outcomes happen. Three things. Where are my soccer players at? Anybody have some background in soccer? Okay. So when you play a match, it's called a match, is that right? Or is it, I'm sure, yeah, okay. Like, I'm an expert in soccer, not really once every 4 years, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know all about soccer. What just happened? One of three things can happen. Maybe not in tournaments or championships, because you can't break a tie, but you could either win, lose, or tie. Now, in all three cases, unless we're talking about, in all three normal cases, even though these are three separate outcomes, they all have something in common. And that is, in all three cases, wouldn't you say the team is trying to win? I mean, you may lose, but you were trying to win. You might tie, you were trying to win. And you may win, but you were trying to win. And that doesn't even mean it has to be max effort. I'm not saying like you were trying your hardest and you lost. Sometimes you might play, like if a collegiate soccer team went to an elementary school, right, to play with the kids as part of community service, I'm doubting they're going to be shooting absolute pellets at these kids, right? So you're playing, and there's your goal, and you're trying, but you're not really trying as hard as you can, right? You're kind of letting off. Maybe sometimes letting, I'm going to get the ball, oops, and then, the kids go and score. Yeah. So your effort doesn't necessarily have to be maximum to still try to win. Now, the way I want you to look at it is, I don't want you to look at it as if I'm playing little kids, I'm trying to lose. I want you to look at it as, I'm still trying to win, I'm just not trying very hard to win. I mean, I'm still going in the right direction, and I'm still kind of getting the ball. And that's how, technically, the options that muscles have. Muscles can only pull. And when they pull, one of three things can happen. They can either win. Now, what does that mean when a muscle wins? Well, muscles pull in a direction of motion, just like puppeteer strings pull in the direction of motion. And when something is pulling in a direction of motion, wouldn't you say that it's trying to cause that motion? I mean, when I attach a rope to the tree in the yard, I'm trying to move the tree in the direction of my pole. I'm trying to do a job. So if I observe motion in the direction of the pole that I'm trying to cross, I'm kind of doing my job. I'm kind of winning. I'm doing what I'm trying to do. Good thing my son did not come to 7:30 class, because in 8:30 class, it was hell to pay. At one time, he snuck around the back, started on this end, and just rolled across the classroom all the way to the other side. I was just like, it was interesting. Now, a muscle can only pull. And it would be egotistical to say that every time a muscle tries to cause motion in the direction of pull, it actually does so. Sometimes muscles are trying to move something, whether that's max effort or sub-max effort, and it doesn't win. No motion happens in the direction of its pull. And that's what we refer to kind of as a tie, because the same amount of force that I'm trying to move this way is going in the opposite direction. They cancel each other out. And so we have a tie. You do this a lot if you've ever had little brothers, sister, cousins, and you're playing tug of war, right, with them. That's in your book, by the way, that example. Where They're like, hey, let's play tug of war. And you're like, okay, I could totally crush you if I wanted to. I mean, you're thinking that, but you're not going to tell the kid, right? And so they're pulling, and they're like, and you're just like, oh my God, you're so strong. At any time, you can sling them across the room, right? But you choose to match their force. You choose to tie. And when you tie their pull on the rope doesn't go anywhere. So again, it doesn't have to be a max effort tie. It could be a sub-max effort tie. And the analogy there is if I have a 5-pound dumbbell, yeah, I can sling it across the room, but I can also choose to tie. I could choose to keep the rope in the same place. I could choose to keep it still. Because the amount of force or influence or torque or moment, however you want to call it, that's trying to do this, I'm going to counter with the same amount of force that's trying to do that. However, and again, this is how I want you to view it. The muscles pull. It's not that it's choosing to lose. I still want you to think of it as it's trying to win. It's just not trying all of its effort. It's not just giving max effort. If I'm playing chess with my son, I'm still trying to win. I'm just not going all out to win. I'm choosing to kind of play with less intent. But I'm still trying to win. I mean, I'm not going backwards with my chess pieces. I'm still going forward. I'm still playing by the rules. I'm just not giving max effort. So don't look at giving max effort as not still trying to win. You're just not trying with all your might. But you're still trying to win. The muscle is still trying to shorten. How do I know that? Let me think of an example. Do you have any shoulder problems, injuries, anything like that? Okay. Do you mind putting your arm out for me? Okay. Don't let me push you down. Don't let me push you down, okay? Now, what that showed me is that her body knew that in order to keep her arm in the same position, and I'm trying to push down, she needed muscles to pull up, to match my force, right? Don't let me push down. Now, she's pulling to match my force, but what happens if my force goes away? Well, then she wins, because there's nothing there to counter it, right? So the point is that even though you didn't see motion, her muscles were still trying to win. Even though she wasn't giving max effort, she could have made my hand go up. That's the key. Trying to win all the time. Guys, even at rest, your muscles pull. They pull at all times. There's tone. There's pull force. At all times on your muscles. Again, even when you die, there's pull force. Okay? Muscles only pull. And when they pull, one of three things can happen. I talked about winning, I talked about tying, now I'm going to talk about choosing to lose. A majority of time, when your muscles lose, you're choosing to lose. If your muscles lose and you're not choosing to lose, you may have a problem. Meaning, imagine doing a bench press with no one around the spot, and the weight is actually beating you and you're giving it your all. You may have a problem. So in a majority of activities of daily living, it's more like the scenario with the kid playing tug of war, where you're not pulling with max effort, you choose to tie, and then all of a sudden you start to let them win. You choose to lose. You let them win. That's what happens when you're doing curls, right? I'm going to win, but if I keep winning, if my pride gets in the way and say, no, dude, I'm not a loser, you're going to have an interesting time doing another rep. How are you going to get it down? You have to let it go down in order to make it come back up again. I have to let my son win a little bit so that I can make it lose eventually. I mean, you see the concept there? So, muscles can only pull. Now, the reason I started off with win, lose, or draw, or win, lose, or tie is because There's names for these things that I know you guys have heard before. Concentric contractions, eccentric contractions, isometric contractions, right? Why do you think there's 3 of them? And there is only 3. Plyometrics is a sequence of contractions. It's not a different type of contraction, it's just a sequence. So why do you think there's 3? Because there's only 3 things that can happen in a normal functioning muscle pull. It can either cause motion in the direction of its pull, prevent motion, or allow motion. Win, lose, or draw. You can either win, tie, or lose. That's it. That's how those things get their names. All right? All right, go to the page where, I think it's phase 2. It's where we start talking about muscles. Muscles, all right. So phase 2, how muscles work. And I love that term, work. In fact, you're going to hear me say work a lot more than you're going to hear me say the C word, contraction. I don't like the word contraction. And I'll explain why, and hopefully you'll see what I'm trying to say. But those are going to be synonymous for this class, work and contraction. So, how do muscles work? Well, it's kind of like who, what, when, where, why. Muscles can only pull. Oh, that's cool. How do they pull? What's making them pull? And believe me, I'm not here. But one of the reasons I went into biomechanics is because my master's degree was in exercise physiology. And there were way too many syllables for me to learn on some of those enzymes and this and that. Like 6 carbon becomes a 4 carbon, and poof, David Copperfield comes in and makes this energy happen with an investment phase. And I'm like, what's that mean with the dude's like, I'm out. The hell is me? Like, how is it? And so my point is that whatever happens physiologically, whatever kind of magic, whatever kind of sorcery, it doesn't change what's happening mechanically. What I mean by that is, regardless of all the different steps and processes and calcium and ryanodine receptors and all that stuff, to the heart of the matter is, muscles have different properties. And one of those properties is excitability, meaning that in the contractile components, if you zap it with electricity, some magical things happen that makes the muscle want to pull more, right? And you can get into the T-tubules and how it's kind of like a balloon, and then if you push in, there's an invagination where the action potential goes down and releases. Who cares? I zap it with electricity, it pulls more. And I know that because if you've ever been in therapy and they put on the electrical stim on you, right? The more they crank it up, what happens to your muscle? It contracts more. I learned this lesson when I was in Mexico. I went visit our exchange student who went back to Mexico. Her name was Maida. And Maida and I were really good friends. But Maida had a boyfriend who's now her husband who was like, okay, do y'all remember Despicable Me 2? Do y'all remember El Macho? That was this dude, bro. He was just like, I'm like, God, dog, dude, they put Tonyo in a movie. He's very macho. I mean, like, they come pick me up at the airport, and I'm like, why is that dude's chest hair puffing out? Like, I thought it was like a chia pet or something. It was very macho. Shake his hand, he didn't talk to me. I broke him in. We were cool at the end, right? But the first night we were there, we were at dinner, and he motions over to this man who had these little metal rods, and the dude was just walking around, clinking them. And I was like, that's kind of interesting. Tink tink, he's just tinking them around. And Tonyo motions him over, gives him some pesos, and he looks at me and says, "Test of manhood." I was like, whoa, this dude speaks English. I didn't know he spoke English because he was just talking Spanish the whole time, probably talking about me. And so I didn't know what was going on, but when in Rome, I'm like, all right, man, let's do it. They were electrodes, and the guy had basically a electricity box, like a big tin tube box. And the game was who could take the most electricity in their body before they gave up. That was the game. And so like people crowded around, they're like, ah! I'm like, ah! And so you put them in each hand and the dude starts cranking it up. And he's laughing, he's like, yes. And then when he got like towards the end, like everything, I'm like this, and I'm like, my tongue is in fetal, my eyes are in fetal, I look possessed. And so that lesson, and oh, by the way, he went second and he took like one more vote than me, but he knew what he had to do to beat me, so that's not kind of fair. The point is that the more the guy jacked up the electricity, the more my body contracted. So there are properties of the muscle that are like that. We call those the contractile components. Now, what you see on the board or in your book, hopefully you have the textbook so you don't have to write all this stuff down, is Hill's muscle model. What I love about Hill's muscle model is that it simplifies the stuff inside a muscle that creates pull force. Simple works for me. So I know there's a lot of things happening in the contractile components, but in terms of mechanics, it doesn't matter. They get pulls. It's tension. Now, keep in mind, Hill's muscle model doesn't say, well, you have stretchy stuff up here and the contractile down there. No, it's all mixed in together. All it's doing is extracting them and just showing you the different components that are within the muscle. Okay? So Hill's muscle model is structured like a muscle in terms of you have tendon structures that I'm going to get to, the series elastic. Then the box right there, right, the rectangle, that's meant to be the muscle belly itself, and then you have tendon on the inside. And tendon is just an inert, non-contractile rope. So let me tell you how a muscle really works in terms of mechanics. You have what we know as tendons, right? The white stuff, and that's inert. You can zap it with electricity, it doesn't do anything. There's nothing in there that responds to electricity. You know, it's like a rubber band. You know a rubber band can pull, you know this band can pull, but if I zap it with electricity, is it going to pull more? No, it's inert. It doesn't have the properties in it to make it want to pull more. Now, the tendon doesn't stop, even though we call it tendon. It doesn't stop when the red part of the muscle happens. It actually keeps going through the muscle. That's what fascia and epimysium and endomysium and perimysium. Y'all remember all that stuff, right? Giving you some Alciator Friday's Halloween, so I want to give y'all some fright. Not her, bless her heart. I'm talking about the lectures, the information. Y'all will start rumors and stuff. Some scary stuff, man, because there was so much information, right? Well, my point is that those inert structures pass through the muscle and then out the other side to the other muscles. That kind of makes sense. Where if you go to the store to get meat, you don't just go grab meat, you know, pack up a handful of meat. It's shrink wrapped. It's packed, right, to keep the meat right together. That's what your fascia and all those other things do. Is they kind of shrink wrap that meat in there to keep it in one space. So the point is that inside the muscle belly, you have contractile components, actin, the myosin, the little filaments, and the way I like to think of them is like little cilia, or like rowers. But one of the reasons rowers on a boat have to all work together, right? They have to coordinate, because in the open water, if one side pulls too much, the boat's going to drift, and if one side, so you have to sink your row to cancel out this. You don't have to worry about that in the muscle. The muscle's not going to drift left or right. So my point is that all those little rowers don't have to co-coordinate. It's not like, okay, guys, ready? Okay. It's like a bubble brush, man. It's just constantly, and the more you excite it, the faster it goes. That's exactly what happens too. If you put a stethoscope, you're going to hear my muscle go. The more you zap it, the more it pulls. Yes? Okay. The other stuff, the elastic components, those are the rubber band-like properties of muscles. They still pull, they are inert, they don't respond to electrical stimulation, they respond to length. And that's all they respond to. What do I mean by that?
So much pull. More pull. More pull. More pull. Right? Respond to length. Longer is stronger when it comes to the elastic properties of a muscle. So in exercise physiology, y'all might have learned about length tension in terms of the sarcomeres and the contractile components, where if you shorten and they overlap, there's less pull force. That's all true. But you know what doesn't care about in terms of shorter or longer is, in terms of overlap, is the stretchy stuff. For the rubber band stuff, longer is always stronger. Now imagine a TheraBand. Again, the more I stretch it, the more it's going to want to return to its original form.
So you have elastic properties. And again, technically they're made of the same stuff, guys. So why do we call it something different? Location, location, location. Every now and then I'll toss out like a nugget of information, like, man, this dude knows a lot about physiology. No, I know like 3 things. I just kind of keep repeating them over and over again and make it seem like I'm smart. Did you know the difference between blood plasma and interstitial fluid? Location, location, location. If it's in the blood, it's plasma. But the same material, if it's in the interstitium, it's called interstitial fluid. It's the same stuff. But the location of it changes what we call it. And it's no different here. We have series elastic components. The stretchy stuff that's in series to the muscle belly. Think about in series as this. If you were going to line up kids to go to lunch, wouldn't you line them up in series, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other? So you have one component of pull, then the other component of pull, then the other component of pull. One after the other, after the other. Series stretchy stuff. But the same stuff can also be side by side with the contractile components. You would line kids up in parallel if you want to play that classic super awesome game that may not be able to be played anymore, Red Rover. Or as like we like to call it, Death March. Because we come in like feet high and talons high, man. So if you were playing, does anybody know what, who doesn't know what Red Rover is, right? Red Rover is when you would line up like side by side, and then you say, Red Rover, let so-and-so come over, and they come in, and you break through it. But the point is that lining up in parallel is side by side. Series, parallel, side by side. It's the same concept. Lining up in parallel is, hey, there's stretchy stuff that's side by side with the contractile stuff. That's all it is. Same stuff, different location. All right? So the sum total of the contractile components that we innervate with nerves, and the more we give it electricity, the more it creates pull force, plus the stretchy stuff creates the overall pull force of a muscle. That's it. Longer is stronger for the overall pull of the force, not for the contractile components. I understand that there's some too much, too little, but let me offer you an example of how we know at the end of the day, longer is stronger. Has anybody ever heard of the Frank Starling mechanism at the heart? Anybody heard of that? Where the more you fill a heart with blood, the more rebound force it's going to give you back out. And a lot of that has to do with the stretchy stuff. The more you stretch it out, the more it's going to want to return to its original shape. There's no bones involved. It's all about being stretched and wanting to return. And I'm going to show you length tension relationships to kind of prove that point to whole muscles. In other words, as the contractile components go down, as you lengthen it, the stretchy stuff exponentially goes up to compensate for it, to make up for it. Okay? All right, what's the other thing I want to make sure I introduce you guys today to? Muscles only pull. I gave you the components. Oh my gosh, look how tiny he was. Oh, he's almost 13 now. So, quick story. one time when I came up with this analogy, it's a tickle analogy, right? So if someone's super ticklish, if you just give them a little tickle, they're going to respond corporately, like, stop, stop. But if you give them a more tickle, they're going to respond even more. And if you give them a lot of tickle, they're in the fetal position, right? So the tickle is the nerve stimulation, and the more you give, the more response you're going to get. So I called my major professor, this might have been 8 years ago, a long time, and I was like, Dr. Weimer, I thought of this really cool analogy for muscle contraction. And so I had a student, and I was like, pick your arms up, and I tickled, and I was like, the more you tickle, the more they want to contract. It was awesome. And my major professor said, Brian, was it a girl? And I was like, oh, good point. And I was like, no, she's a female. And she was like, that's not a good analogy. So I was like, okay. She was like, well, you can do it with your son. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do that. So I put him in the, I got you, so adorable. Look at it. Bless his heart, he had no clue what was going on. I was like, do you want to help Daddy? He's like, yeah. I was like, pick your arms up. He's like, yeah. I'm like, ah! Yeah. But I like gave him a chocolate or something. So we're cool now. It's all good. Okay. So, on Friday, I'm going to get into resting versus working tone, and we're going to segue that into contraction types, and then we're going to segue that into, I thought I was going to get into this today, but I don't want to push it. I want to be able to kind of do some joint motion practice. Okay? Sure. Any questions about that first introductory stuff, right? Muscles can only pull, and I taught you what's actually doing the pulling inside the muscle from a mechanical perspective. Okay? Do y'all want to, is there any body part in particular that you guys want me to do some examples, practice? In other words, I'm going to open it up, just kind of like, hey, can you do this? Can you do that? So, anybody want to start us off?
We do an example of the subtalar and the knee.
So the question was subtalar and knee. Do you want them at the same time, or do you want them separately?
Either way.
Okay.
Okay, you ready? Remember, this is shaking the edge of sketch. I start here, and I get this. You guys see? No? I start here. I do this. You guys can see? All right, give that some thought. Don't answer it out loud. Obviously, you can answer it within your study circle, but I don't want you to answer it out loud because some people take different times to get to a conclusion. I don't want to ruin that. It's like giving out spoilers. This is a spoiler-free zone. Which I'm going to watch Joker today with my wife. I'm excited. She may be horrified. I don't care. She knew what she was getting into.
Wait.
Whoa, that was nuts.
I haven't even looked at this shit. All I know is that eversion's going out, so I made it.
You did it both
Yeah.
bilateral inversion of the subtalar.
Anybody want to see that? This is
Okay,
what
so
you-
bilateral
Putting it
would
like
be.
this. With both.
We did it. These two kids are standing, and the third older kid, right? He really set all this stuff up. takes a rope, pulls a ladder, and the ladder falls, and they fall right through the holes, right there. So they did it. You didn't do anything, little Karen. All right, guys, here we go. What did you observe? We analyzed motion joint by joint. So which conversation are we gonna have first? Sub-talar, what'd you see? Bilateral sub-talar joint inversion. Good. Okay. Next conversation. Knees. Okay. What'd you see? Left knee flexion. There you go. How about a functional task? So analyze the obvious motions. I'm going to leave it open-ended, but if you were going to do a vertical jump, you're going to jump as high as you can. And we talk about in biomechanics, there's phases, right? Prep phase, action phase, follow through. Action phase is actually what's going to get your butt up in the air. So doesn't it make sense if you got to get as high as up in the air, you kind of have to be in a position of a bullfrog, right? You got to have to be down in order to jump up, right? So the prep phase is just the act of going down, and the action phase is the act of coming up. And the follow through is basically what happens after. In other words, once I can no longer make myself go up anymore, that's insignificant for this conversation. So what I'd like for you to do is talk about motions at the ankles, knees, hips, going down, and then coming up. Go.
What did he ask?
He basically asked all the joints involved in like when you're about to perform a vertical jump. So
You have your ankle, which is dorsiflexion. So when you squat down, you go like this, but on the ground, obviously. And then you have, so that's bilateral. And you have bilateral flexion of your knee.
yeah,
And
flexion.
then of the hip.
Yeah.
And then if we're talking arms, you're gonna have,
I've missed a lot of classes. I don't have he covered like
he covered everything.
I know that's I know. Oh God, I have so much studying to do.
Shoulder.
You're doing great.
It's all bilateral, but shoulder would be,
Jeez. Let me see.
it would be extension.
You guys, if anybody knows of any like haunted houses that are like I say kid friendly, but just more for the young kids that you know. I mean, I'm not talking like simulation of slitting throats and that kind of stuff. You know, my boys are still kind of not there yet. But if anybody knows of an area, a haunted house or hayride that's kind of more geared towards the family, maybe leave that on your feedback sheet for me. I appreciate it. Thank you. What's that? Oh no, it's all good. I heard one good one was 13th Gate. I heard that was really good. I heard Barney's Haunted Hayride.
I can do it.
You know,
Girl, that
A lot
last
of
set.
videos.
No, literally, that's all I really need. Because it's not a lot. I make some note cards and shit. I'll be fine. So I need to do stupid this on this next one. I'm not taking that final, girl.
sons
No.
won't even go into Spirit.
I heard my favorite.
Like Spirit Halloween the store, they're like,
My fiance told me around trails.
they used to do it at the children's museum.
That's it.
All right, guys, here we go. Prep phase, going down. Think of the elevator going down. You're gonna have bilateral hip flexion, bilateral knee flexion, bilateral ankle dorsiflexion, more than likely. And then as you transition from slowing yourself going down to speeding yourself coming up, you're gonna have hip extension, knee extension, ankle joint plantar flexion. And then even when the hips are in anatomical, knees are in anatomical, then your ankles are gonna continue to plantar flex, right? A little bit of extra lag nap
to get you up in the air. Now, don't freak out, like it's not like, man, is he gonna ask an open-ended question like that? Of course not. I might just show you one position of a person mid vertical jump, and I say the person's going up. The person is in the act of going up. What motions would you observe? The person is in the phase of going down. What would it would be those kind of things. Not necessarily do a motion analysis. It would be specific. Anybody else have a joint or something you want me to give an example of? Yes, sir.
Can you review the knee in and of itself? Like all motions just for knee?
Sure. Flexion in the fetal, extension out of fetal. When the knee is flexed, you can have external or lateral rotation. And you could have internal or medial rotation. And the reason your knee gives some rotation is because of this. If your knee didn't give a little, it would take a lot. So we have some rotation that's allowed because of the cutting and planting that we do as a normal functional task. See, we don't cut and plant on our hands, right? So we don't need the elbow to do that kind of stuff, but we need the knee to. So flexion, extension, internal, external rotation.
You said that's only when the knee's flexed though?
Gotta be, yeah. When the knee is extended, it's screwed home. It's locked into place. And there's a reason for that too. Because a lot of the times when we are in a locked position, we have efficiency of, as a bipedal animal, we have to conserve as much energy as possible. So when we are in this extended position and being able to stand all day, we can't really rely on muscles to be on all the time. We love to let bone rest on bone. So there's this screw home mechanism that when my knees are locked out, that I don't have to use any one particular muscle to kind of work to keep me up there. It's like if you were just here for a long time, you'd feel it, right? So that screw home mechanism is really in place to be efficient for us to be able to stand for long periods of time. But since we lock it home, we have to have something to unlock it, and I'm going to talk to you about in biomechanics about a special muscle back there called the popliteus that can unlock the knee. It's almost like when you were a kid and you had friends and you go from behind them and kick them in the back of the knee, and you have a muscle that does that. Just more tactful. Good questions, guys. Good questions. Anything else?
Could we look at the illusion of the cut with
The illusion of what?
at the knee whenever we do
Oh, okay.
externalization?
So the question is, when the distal segment's fixed, some people call that closed chain, potato. This is external rotation of the knee. And this is internal rotation of the knee. Remember, the initial motions are from the smaller, the smaller piece moving about the bigger piece. When you go to turn the faucet on in the backyard, it's from the perspective of the little spinny thing, not from the perspective of the building. But technically, if I do this here, I can get the same thing by doing that there. It's just that it's fixed; it's not going anywhere. So we always give the initial motion kind of mechanically sound with the smaller piece moving about the bigger piece. However, in human motion, we can move the bigger piece about the smaller piece. Unlike that door, and that's the difference between engineers and biomechanists, is that engineers know that it's only going to be that door that moves about that hinge, about the wall. In biomechanics, I can have the wall move about the door. So I have to be able to see that opening the door is either moving the door about the building like this, or moving the building about the door like that to get the same motion. So right knee external rotation, moving the smaller piece about the bigger piece, is the same as moving the bigger piece about the smaller piece in the opposite global direction, but the exact same local direction. Good questions, guys. Good questions. All right. If you want to read ahead,